Hello everybody and welcome to the Battle Brothers Council, the series where we share information and thoughts on the upcoming DLC, Beasts and Exploration. In today's episode, we focus on the new weapons that were announced. Let's just start with the two-handed new weapons. I'm gonna run through what's new and then give you my opinion, as I feel they are kind of similar in what they propose to the new game. Let's start with the new pole hammer. It's very simple. It's a hammer, but it's a two-handed weapon, and it can attack from 2 tiles away, meaning that you can demolish the armor of your enemies from 2 tiles away behind your front line. So there's that. There's the spearm. I don't know how to pronounce that, but that's just Battle Brothers for you. It's essentially a huge pike that allows you to use the spear wall ability from 2 tiles away. So you can go all Roman Empire and just make the turtle with the spikes. So your front line is having shield wall and spear wall, and your second line has spear wall too, and you just poke the ever living shit out of anyone who goes near you. There's also a two-handed mace. Now that's a little different because it comes with new effects and systems. Basically, it has two skills as a usual weapon does. The first one is called Cudgel, sorry. Now that skill makes your enemies dazed. Daze is a new mechanic. Essentially, if you hit your opponent with it, with the Cudgel skill, your opponent's maximum fatigue, initiative, and damage output gets reduced. So basically what this does is assuring your enemies can do less and less as the battle progresses. The other skill of the two-handed mace is a new stun. The skill is called Strike Down, which perfectly symbolizes what it does. You can stun your enemies, but again, a new mechanic. It will stun your enemies for 2 turns, not just one, for 2. So it's kind of a guaranteed disarming of that one particular enemy. So that's pretty good. Let's just talk about these three for now, because I feel they are kind of what we already had, but it's a two-handed weapon. I think I'm not going to be popular with my opinion, I believe. I don't think we needed this. I think there was something about the armor destroying element of the hammer. You have to have the balls to go move closer and do it. And I personally don't think I will be using the pole hammer. It sounds very heavy of a weapon too. Speedham is alright, but as the game progresses, you probably want to be less and less defensive. I don't know, it kind of feels just for the sake of it, like we didn't have that thing with a two-handed weapon, so here it is. As for two-handed maces, that's a little bit more interesting with the new mechanics. I feel it's a little bit OP, and it can be a pain in the ass when it's against you. But I'm actually alright with that. There is going to be a new perk with the two-handed mace as well, so looking forward to that too. But all in all, I feel like we didn't really need these weapons at all. And speaking of weapons we didn't really need, now we have throwing spears, because everybody loves throwing weapons. Well, let's be real, no one really likes them. I personally only use the axes against the skeletons because it's not piercing damage. So I can equip my archers with them and support my front guys. But I guess some people like it. I don't know. The throwing spear is essentially the same as the javelin. It's just bigger and it can destroy shields. Now, that's more useful. I gotta admit that makes the throwing spear actually useful to be able to destroy the shields of our enemies. But I still don't feel like I would be using them. Up next we have the golden dog, good and this thing. We have this thing. Okay, it's a club and a spear, but it's a two-handed weapon. Basically, what it does, and I hope it's gonna be more light than the usual two-handed weapons. What it's gonna do is that you can thrust like with a spear, but you can also knock your enemies to stun them for that turn. That could be really useful early game, I think, when some of your brothers are at a skill level when you feel like, well, I don't want them to use a spear now because it doesn't bring any damage. But with this, they can have the ability, the bigger hit chance of a spear, but you can also knock your enemies if you feel vulnerable. So it's alright. I see some potential in it. But we'll see how it goes in reality. These that we just covered, I'm not super excited about them, okay? It's fine, alright, but I wouldn't buy a DLC just for them. As for these new, I still wouldn't buy a DLC just for them, but they're more interesting. The first one is a three-headed mace, which is a one-handed weapon, acts like the usual flails, but here's the thing. Every attack is split into 3 separate attacks, which also means that 3 of them can miss, 3 of them can hit, but there's a bigger chance of hitting your enemies with at least one of them. It's a little bit brute forcing yourself through the opponent life, but it can be really, really good when you think about it, especially if you poison it. You can kind of guarantee to poison the enemy you hit with. So that's an interesting one, I must admit. And I wouldn't feel safe facing one of these or more of them. So that's going to be interesting to see. And the other one is actually even more interesting in my opinion. It's the fencing sword, which is essentially for the duelists. Now, the idea of the fencing sword is to have a brother who's very mobile, have really light armor, so he can swiftly maneuver between lines and enemies. And it has a new mechanic as well. It's called the lunge. Basically, your brother moves 2 tiles to attack with a thrust. But what's interesting about it, that the devs confirmed, if I recall correctly, on Twitter, that he can actually move out of the zone of control with this move because it's a skill. So you can maneuver quite a lot between lines, between your enemies, just to lunge here and there. So the duelist would be more mobile inside the battle. So you see, oh, he's struggling, he needs some support. Well, why don't we just put a duelist there so he can support him? So this is interesting. I think duelists are underrated a little bit. I myself am guilty of this because it's really hard to train a brother to be a good duelist, in my opinion. And once you have someone who doesn't need a shield in order to stay alive in a battle, I'm usually equipping him with a two-handed weapon because it just brings more damage and I can attack 2 enemies at the same time at least. But that's just me, and I know that some people love the duelist. It's just really difficult to train them, in my opinion. So that's pretty much what we've been seeing in this dev blog. We are going to get more weapons. There's going to be a similar two-handed sword that is the great sword. It's just the same. However, with the great sword, you can equip it earlier because it's not as heavy as the long sword is. So that's a nice touch, in my opinion. We're gonna get even more new weapons and more legendaries, but we don't know much about it just yet. We have to go into the wilderness to learn more about them. So this is the dev blog. That's about it. All in all, I think it's good. I'm happy with having more weapons, to be honest. Not that we desperately needed them, but I kind of got bored a few times with facing the same old weapons, using the same old weapons. So it's nice to mix it up a little bit. But again, it's medieval times, so there's only a handful of weapons we could use. But I think they did a really good job of adding new stuff, except for the pole hammer and the pole spear. I wouldn't say it's lazy because I know they worked really hard on it, but it's still a very useless thing. And I actually liked the idea of having weapons that are only two-handed and having weapons that are only one-handed weapons, because then you have to make a decision. You have to make a choice. Now you don't have to, because you have everything. You just have to decide what's your favorite and go for it. But that's just my idea. Let me know in the comment section, what do you think and feel about these new weapons? What are you the most excited to have? What are you the most afraid of to face? And all in all, what do you think about this update? Until next time, as brothers we go, take care of yourselves.